In the Georgia House, lawmakers stood to applaud.
In the Senate, lawmakers stood in silence as Republican Senator Bill Cowsert read the names of the 2 students and 2 teachers killed, allegedly by a 14-year-old gunman at Appalachia High School last year.
Mason Skirmerhorn, Christian Angulo, Christine Irami, and Richard Aspinwall.
For months, lawmakers have been negotiating a massive bill to address school safety in the aftermath of that deadly shooting.
There's nothing like worrying about the safety of your children and your grandchildren. And every parent ought to know when they drop their child off at school that they're coming home safe.
Now, legislation is headed to the desk of Governor Brian Kemp.
And this time of year, the pile on that desk is getting high.
Friday is the last day of the legislative session. Lawmakers have been scrambling to pass hundreds of bills before the final gavel bangs, and the mood is getting tense.
For different members, it's been a good day, some a not so good day. The emotions have run high all day. Mine have. There's been a lot of things said today on both sides of the aisle.
In the final stretch, Republican lawmakers moved to pass a string of controversial bills, including a measure expanding religious protections known as RFRA.
And on another bill, House Democrats staged a walkout in protest.
Take a walk! Take a walk!
And the fate of a controversial election change and a proposal to compensate the wrongfully convicted are still uncertain with just a day to go.
Tacking the wrongfully incarcerated compensation bipartisan bill that our colleagues have worked tirelessly to pass for years onto this punitive SB 244 makes me physically sick.
Ahead, your guide to Sine Die under the Gold Dome. I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali, and this is Plugged In from WABE.
All right, Sine Die is upon us. The state capitol has been bustling with stressed lawmakers, but also visitors from all over the state. In the last week, I got to spend a lunch break on Liberty Plaza with a group of rescue and service dogs. And then on Wednesday, the Columbia High School marching band. Rahul, briefly walk us through what to expect in the next 24 hours.
So, Sam, over on the Senate side, they set a calendar Wednesday morning with more than 80 pieces of legislation for the final 2 days. The House, they kind of set their calendar as they go. On top of all of that, there are dozens of bills flying back and forth between the House and Senate because every time a change is made, there has to be additional votes.
So in a moment, we'll preview what we're still watching, but a lot has actually already happened this week.
That's right. Let's start with that sweeping school safety bill. Sam, this legislative package was a top priority of House Speaker John Burns, but it was such a complex piece of legislation that went through weeks of negotiations and revisions. Even up until the morning of the vote this week, you and I were running around this Capitol trying to figure out the impact of some of the last-minute changes.
Yeah, HB 268 provides grants for districts to hire officials focused on identifying mental health issues. It requires behavioral health training, swift transfer of student records, and an anonymous threat reporting system. The legislation also provides mobile panic alert systems for teachers and stiffens criminal penalties for students who commit terroristic acts. But the final bill abandoned plans to set up a database for sharing information about student behavior between state agencies. Proponents argued that had officials been able to connect the dots earlier, they might have been able to intervene before the tragedy at Appalachia. But the plan drew concerns about privacy and profiling and was ultimately scrapped by the Senate in favor of a central alert system designed to flag school safety threats. Republican Representative Chris Irwin says there is more work to do, but the compromise was worthwhile.
Well, this was a must-do, let me tell you. This wasn't we can turn around and run away from this bill. This was a must-do bill.
Irwin was joined by the bill's lead sponsor, Republican Representative Holt Persinger. He represents part of Barrow County, which is home to Appalachia, and he began to cry as he described how it felt to watch this bill pass.
Yeah, definitely relief. It's been a long, hard road. From September 4th, we've been working on this almost every single day.
Now, many Democrats expressed disappointment that lawmakers did not tackle firearm access, but the school safety bill ultimately passed with overwhelming bipartisan support.
Okay, Sam, let's move forward and talk about some of the messy legislative fights we've had here in just the past 48 hours.
Almost every Democrat in the Georgia House walked out of the chamber during a vote to prohibit state resources from being used to provide gender-affirming treatments to state prison inmates. Outside the chamber, House Minority Leader Carolyn Hughley called this bill political theater and a distraction from more pressing policy issues.
People sent us here to do great work. They did not send us here to bully people, to ostracize people, to discriminate against people. Many of us are descendants of those who have felt the same thing.
The bill sponsor says there are 5 known inmates seeking some form of gender-affirming treatments. On the House floor, Majority Leader Chuck F. Strachan condemned the walkout.
To see members flee the chamber because they are unwilling to actually represent their constituency, put the vote on the board, and let it be known to all Georgians where they stand is incredibly disappointing.
Republicans have introduced many bills focused on transgender Georgians. Earlier this week, GOP lawmakers sent a ban on transgender girls playing girls' school sports in K-12 and college levels to the governor's desk. Republicans have also used trans issues to attack Democrats, including during the 2024 election. So when the Senate voted on this bill last month, a few notable Democrats actually voted yes. But this walkout in the House is a very different approach. Though I should say it also allowed its members en masse to avoid taking a vote on a politically precarious piece of legislation. But I think this move is also interesting because across the hall, Democrats in the Senate a few hours later tried to hold up a bill that would restrict schools from including diversity, equity, and inclusion in their curriculum.
Yes, Sam, I was in the Senate chamber with our colleague, Mei Shu, and the only way to describe it, Sam, it was a late night hot mess. Take a listen.
I'm sure you have an objection to that, I'm sure.
Mr. President, I would like to appeal the ruling of the chair.
I figured you'd want to do that.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Let's do that. She has the right to do that.
Democrats introduced something like 20 amendments. The reality is that Democrats have little power to stop some of this legislation they disagree with, so they have to be inventive about how to fight it. I asked Senate Minority Leader Harold Jones about that.
Our tool is to make sure we push the envelope and make sure we stand up for the people of Georgia. So we've always had that tool. There may be certain strategies here and there, but these amendments were not necessarily a strategy. I believe in these amendments. I believe we want to make sure what could and could not be taught. And so that's why you didn't see a walkout. You saw us ready to fight.
Sam, this is interesting because I remember you saying that at a recent town hall for U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock that Democrats wanted to see more fight, more action. This also comes as U.S. Senator Cory Booker held the Senate floor for a record-long speech to draw attention to Trump's policy. We'll hear more about that later in the show. Late Wednesday night, Georgia Republicans also passed a controversial bill to expand legal protections for religious Georgians, and that is headed to Governor Brian Kemp's desk. Republican Governor Nathan Deal vetoed a similar bill in 2016.
The legislation is known as the Georgia Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. Similar legislation has been introduced session after session, but has stalled amid outcry from corporations and the LGBTQ community. The Metro Atlanta and Georgia Chambers of Commerce opposed the legislation again this year. Here's Republican Representative Will Wade, who supported the bill.
Under this bill, if a law or government action significantly encroaches on someone's faith practice, the government must show a compelling interest and is done in the least restrictive way possible. That is a high bar, as it should be, when fundamental liberty is at stake.
Democratic Representative Esther Panich says Georgia's abortion law conflicts with Jewish teaching and says lawmakers interested in RFRA are not talking about revisiting that legislation.
We cannot claim to value religious freedom while dismissing millennia of Jewish religious tradition. This Jewish teaching should tell you exactly what RFRA would protect. Yet this bill isn't about protecting minorities. It's creating a pathway to discrimination under the guise of religious liberty.
Governor Kemp says he will sign the bill. He wrote in a statement that his commitment to Georgians of all faiths remains unwavering, and the state will remain a welcoming place for all.
You know, Sam, these were not the only contentious debates in the last 48 hours. One that really stood out to me was the revival of an effort to create a formal process for compensating the wrongfully convicted.
But the rub was that Republican lawmakers attached it to SB 244, which could result in taxpayers having to reimburse defendants if the district attorney in their case is disqualified. Sponsors have said this could allow President Trump and his co-defendants to be reimbursed for legal expenses by Fulton County taxpayers. And Rahul, it was striking to see Democrats wrestle with this choice, securing compensation for the wrongfully convicted, coming at the cost of also potentially having to compensate Trump.
You know, Sam, this also put on display something I talk about a lot, the tug of war between the House and the Senate. Currently, lawmakers must consider compensation for the wrongfully convicted on a case-by-case basis through individual pieces of legislation. The last one that was approved here, 2022. And this year, individual compensation resolutions for 5 Jordans didn't even make it out of a Senate committee. Under Senate Bill 244, that task would fall to an expert panel with the ability to compensate the wrongfully convicted $75,000 for every year they served in prison. Look, this is something the House has wanted for a few years and has had bipartisan support. But again, it was combined with a Republican-backed bill that could allow defendants to get lawyer fees reimbursed by local governments if a district attorney is disqualified. In the case of Fulton County, that results in those taxpayers possibly reimbursing President Donald Trump and his co-defendants in the Georgia election interference case following the disqualification of District Attorney Fani Willis. Democratic Representative Shay Roberts said the combination of those made her physically sick.
Attaching these two policies together isn't just bad policy, it's cynical politics at its worst. It puts legislators and voters in a moral straitjacket. If you want to support justice for the wrongfully convicted, you also have to support protecting powerful politicians from accountability. That's not leadership, that's hostage taking.
Sam, for years, Democratic Representative Scott Holcomb has been pushing for this new process and ultimately voted for the bill despite what it was added to.
It does make me uncomfortable that this is not moving alone, but I also, forgive me for those who disagree with me on this, I'm so invested that I can't stop now.
The legislation passed the House and still needs approval over in the Senate, so this is one of those I'm going to be watching for on Sine Die.
And all of these tensions on this series of bills really boiled over on Wednesday night. Here's Democratic Representative Carla Drenner, who has served in the legislature for 25 years.
We have let the other chamber that's running for governor run our chamber over here. We've done all these terrible bills.
This led House Speaker Burns to address this fraught moment before gaveling out around 11 p.m.
I'm going to look forward. I'm going to have a conversation with those that were for and against and do my best to understand everything we did today and the impacts for years to come.
Okay, so let's look ahead now to Sine Die, what's left outstanding that has to be done or could be done before lawmakers shred and toss their papers in the air shouting Sine Die on Friday night.
So they still have to do the 2026 state budget, Sam. I'm told there are only a few remaining issues, but they're contentious. They include how much to fund the state's new $6,500 school voucher program. Look, any kid who applies and gets it, they're going to be covered this year. It's really the question of what is going to be the baseline or how much of a pad is going to be built in, depending on how you look at it. Some of the other things that have come up, the House trying to shift some funding towards new education initiatives, including grants for poor school districts, as the state education funding formula doesn't have a calculation for that. The Senate is not quite on board with that. Also, there were cuts to the state agriculture budget. That's probably why I keep seeing State Agriculture Commissioner Tyler Harper walking the halls of the state capitol.
And I'm watching a push to have Georgia leave a collaborative used to maintain voter lists. This collaborative is called ERIC, or the Electronic Registration Information Center. It's a nonprofit founded by states for sharing information to keep voter lists updated. It includes 24 states and D.C. Georgia's Secretary of State says ERIC is a critical tool. But since 2022, 8 GOP-led states have left ERIC as it's become a target of far-right activists. These bills would have Georgia leave ERIC by mid-2027. Democratic Senator Derek Mallow says Republicans are acting haphazardly.
Not some fly-by-night, shot in the dark, made it happen 10 minutes before. I remember my Uncle Bo, we called him Bo Dilly. He was a carpenter. He said, son, you got to remember that you got to measure twice and cut once.
Republican Senator Max Burns says Democrats' rhetoric is overblown.
We had record voter turnout in 2024. Record voter turnout. No vote was suppressed. None. Not one.
Now, these bills also prohibit state election board rule changes in the 60 days before an election and bans absentee ballots from being returned in person the weekend before an election.
So you can track all of these bills and more at WABE's Bill Tracker at wabe.org/2025 Bill Tracker. Let's take a break. This is Plugged In from WABE. Welcome back to Plugged In. You know, for a week that's focused on the state capitol, there's been a lot of other political news, Sam.
Rahul, you were at the swearing in for the new Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court.
Sam, the ceremony was held here in the House chamber. It was a who's who of the legal community. After he was sworn in by outgoing Chief Justice Michael Boggs, new Chief Justice Nels Peterson addressed the audience, and I wanted to share this little bit from his speech.
When you hear about judicial decisions whose outcomes you don't like, don't reflexively question their legitimacy. It's okay to disagree, even protest. But the rule of law cannot survive a public that views as illegitimate any judicial decision with an outcome they don't like.
Now, at no point did Peterson mention the Trump administration, but that stuck out.
Okay, let's stick with the courts. A federal judge has dismissed a long-running legal challenge to Georgia's touchscreen voting system. Though the court did leave Georgia's voting system intact, the lawsuit revealed security vulnerabilities and a breach in the Coffee County election office by allies of President Trump during the 2020 election.
Man, Sam, this is really one of those cases that feels like it's been going on forever, right?
Yeah, this lawsuit began in 2017 when a group of voters and a nonprofit alleged that Georgia's voting system was susceptible to attack and should be replaced by hand-marked paper ballots. During a trial last year, a University of Michigan computer scientist demonstrated how the machines could be easily tampered with using a ballpoint pen, though a federal report uncovered no evidence the vulnerabilities had ever been exploited. U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg found that while the plaintiffs identified substantial concerns about the voting system, they did not demonstrate they suffered a legally protected harm. Totenberg described the plaintiffs' claims as mere policy disagreements, ruling that they lack standing to sue. Marilyn Marks with the plaintiff Coalition for Good Governance said this fight is far from over. But Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger called the ruling a vindication of Georgia's elections.
So, Sam, let's turn to politics. Now, this week, President Donald Trump announced another round of tariffs. I wanted to focus on auto tariffs and share three interesting voices here at the state capitol. Let me start with Republican State Senator Mike Hodges, who represents the Port of Brunswick, which is now America's top gateway for imported and exported vehicles. In 2024, Sam, it moved 841,000 cars and trucks.
I am gravely concerned about any tariff action that affects the cars that are coming into the Port of Brunswick. And there are lots of jobs. There's a lot of economic activity, to direct spend, and when you consider the multiplier effect.
But fellow Republican Senator Brandon Beach, who's set to leave the legislature and join the Trump administration as U.S. Treasurer, he defends the Trump proposal, saying it will eventually bring manufacturing fully back to the U.S.
Let's be honest, there'll be a little pain. Even the president said there'll be a little pain at first, but then we'll have a level playing field and we'll be really taking advantage of a great economy.
Sam, one more voice, Democratic Senator Emanuel Jones is an auto dealer. He worries about car prices going up, making them more unaffordable, and that it wouldn't matter what car brand it is.
Because a lot of manufacturers, even Korean manufacturers like Hyundai, franchise that I used to own, has an assembly plant here in Georgia. But they assemble vehicles all over the world, and they actually ship those products to us. Brunswick, which is one of our largest ports in the state, that's where most of the cars from overseas are shipped.
He points out that it's up to auto manufacturers to decide how much of the new tariffs they will absorb and how much they'll pass on. That's not decided at the dealership level.
Okay, some more fallout from the 2024 election result. This week, Congresswoman Nikema Williams resigned as chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia. After upset victories in the 2020 cycle, many Democrats, saw Georgia as a blueprint for winning elections in the years to come. But 2024 burst some of that optimism. Some influential Democrats, including Senator Jon Ossoff, who's up for re-election in 2026, began to believe Williams was not up to continuing to chair the DPG while also serving in Congress. Party leaders voted Saturday to make the position full-time, allowing Williams to step aside. And in a statement, she highlighted her role delivering Democratic wins in 2020, saying the best is yet to come.
For now, Sam, former State Representative Matthew Wilson will serve as interim chair.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a moment from the chamber of the U.S. Senate.
New Jersey Senator Cory Booker spoke on the Senate floor for more than 24 hours to call attention to President Trump's policies. Now, this is the longest recorded Senate floor speech.
Booker broke a record held by the South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond, who was protesting civil rights legislation in the 1950s. Booker could not eat or go to the bathroom, though colleagues like Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock could ask lengthy questions to give him a speaking break. Booker began and ended his marathon speech quoting the late Georgia Congressman John Lewis.
He said for us to go out and cause some good trouble, necessary trouble, to redeem the soul of our nation. I want you to redeem the dream. Let's be bold in America.
Truly an impressive feat.
And that's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. If you listen on demand, make sure you head over to the Plugged In feed to subscribe, leave us a rating and a review.
You can also now find us on the radio at 90.1 every Friday morning from 9:30 to 10 a.m. And if you have a question you want to hear answered on the show, write to us at tellus@wabe.org.
We'll be back next week. Sine Die.